on a national basis. We've known that this is going on really since the 50s. So the time when it's going to become acute is upon us, and it's yet another aspect of what we need to manage much more carefully. This would have happened regardless, because we were mining Pleistocene groundwater in much of the country, and in Canada and in other nations. But climate issues make this even more challenging. So here we are.
Linda?
Hi, I'm Linda Holman, member of the committee. I'm following very closely the resurrection of this wonderful tree in Maui that they thought was dead. It's the biggest tree there, and they've got an arborist working on it every day. And they have found now that there's living tissue under what was burned, and they're making a huge effort to bring this tree back and keep it living. And it was just very inspiring to hear how that's happening, because so little good news is coming from there.
Thank you. Damon?
I'm Dana Campbell, and there's so many different things I've been thinking about. One is that I just was reading about these corals in the Caribbean or something that are being cryo frozen, so that once we get our act together, we'll have frozen corals that stick back in the Caribbean. We've been working on this so long, are we going to really be able to stick corals back? Pass it on to you.
Yeah. Yes. Matt's son. I'm gonna follow you just later. I don't really have some
How about this one? All of the carbon that's coming from the smoke from Canada is more carbon being put in the atmosphere than all of their transportation in that same period.
More than? Is that
Or
what you said?
equal to
Oh,
something around that.
I'm Tracy Bertone. I'm the liaison from the council to this committee, also teach physics. And I'm actually really looking forward to listening to your thoughts on interconnectedness, which I did not know about this problem until literally Friday. And that's going to be our major community solar issue, apparently. So
my name is Uzma Siddiqui. I work for Seattle City Light. I'm the senior manager for grid modernization and strategic technology. Big title. Too bad they don't pay me by the letter. Oh well, next time. And I think the thing that I've read recently that's kind of concerning, that's really struck me, is the fires in Greece. Just the idea that this kind of place where culture has been growing for millennia is really negatively impacted, and what does that mean for us as kind of humanity?
Hello, everyone. I'm Jenny Levesque. I'm the External Communications Manager at Seattle City Light. Thank you for letting us join you this evening. I think I'm just always interested in reading more. There's a myriad of articles, but about electrification and electric vehicles and exactly what it's going to take for that change. So keep it general, but yeah.
Point of personal privilege.
of course, Anne.
Could I ask speakers to speak towards the screen, because that's where the microphone is? And so if you speak to each other side to side, we get about 50%, which isn't necessarily enough for me to understand what that is. I don't know if closed captioning is available on this. Corey, have you enabled closed captions?
I don't think we can on webinars, but the speaker, yeah, the speaker's right
Maybe
there.
you can move it a little closer to us.
Yeah, you can grab
Maybe
it.
you can grab it.
Thank you very much.
Of course.
Yeah, I'm glad you spoke up.
Yeah. Okay. One of the things that we've been out talking to people. This is what I told our guests. So I hope it's kind of correct. That we've been out in the field talking to people about issues about climate, and one of the issues that people have raised is the grid reliable? If we plug everything in, if we plug our cars and our what will happen to the grid? That's one question that people are asking. The other is it reliable? Are we gonna be able to, in the long term? The other is about solar and how does solar work in the grid and can we plug everything in? And the fourth one we were hearing a lot about was community solar. So I asked them to cover all that. We'll see what happens. So thank you very much for coming, and I'm gonna share my screen and make us small over here. And
It looks like we're just sharing this, I think we're okay. Okay, and then.
it just rolls down.
Rolls down.
Two fingers.
Got it.
Okay.
Well, we've introduced ourselves, so I think we can move on to the next. Perfect. I just wanted to give you a quick snapshot. And Anne, can you hear me okay? Thumbs up that audio is good? Okay, great.
And do you have a copy of the slideshow?
Absolutely. Yeah. I've provided a PDF, but if you.
I have it.
Okay,
Oh.
if anything else. So Seattle City Light was founded in 1910. We do serve a population of over 961,000 people. What this means in terms of customers is 493,000. So these are meters, right? And so the breakdown for that is 441,000 or close to 442,000 residential and 52,000 commercial. We do serve our service area covers 131 square miles. And then you can see in the map on the right here, oops, sorry, let's see this now. Okay. Of our service area. Oops, oh no, what happened? Our share went away.
Comes in, like on the bottom.
Oops,
I don't think this is my computer.
It's not?
Okay.
oh no.
Oh, there it is.
It just became root stuff.
Oh, it's a touch screen.
Let's see. Everything's now, it's all gone.
The Zoom nightmare.
Okay, there we go. Fit to window?
Yeah.
Nope.
Mm.
Maybe make
What
it
you-
bigger. There we go.
Yay, you got it.
Look at her go.
Oh,
Technology is so much fun.
We'd
Now
like
you-
to.
Now you have you can click the maximize button. Well, now that it's out from under this bar, you can.
It's close.
All right, yay.
Perfect. Okay. So you can see this is a map of our service area. So of course the city of Seattle, but then we have a number of franchise cities, Shoreline and Lake Forest Park to the north. You're very familiar with the second of those, as well as Burien, Tukwila, parts of SeaTac, Renton, Normandy Park, and then unincorporated King County. So we serve both White Center and Bryn Mawr Skyway to the east. Oops. Okay, and then just a quick slide of Seattle City Light's mission. So our mission is to provide customers with affordable, reliable, and environmentally responsible energy services. And thanks for the questions ahead of time. So we've prepared a presentation here to address for the questions that Sarah was kind enough to send along. And we've brought Uzma as our subject matter expert. So happy to run through the questions here, and then we will have time if you've got additional questions at the end. So Uzma, the first of which was, is the electric grid reliable?
Well, now the grid is a big place, and one of the electric utilities have lots of different ways of kind of measuring what reliability looks like. So two of the metrics that we often use are SAIDI and SAIFI. SAIDI stands for System Average Interruption Duration Index, and SAIFI has to do with frequency. So what we wanted to do is share with you these metrics. It applies to the distribution system. So the electrical grid has the generation, transmission, substation, distribution, and then customer, right? So SAIDI and SAIFI are about the distribution system. That's the metric. So we thought it would be helpful to kind of do a comparison. You know, how are we doing against the nation, against all of Washington, against public power? I don't know if you know this, but there are 63 or 64 utilities in the state of Washington. 3 of them are investor-owned utilities. The remaining are public power. So we're comparing ourselves against those public power utilities. And the blue is Seattle City Light, our rolling numbers from March of 2022 to February of 23. So these are numbers that are calculated on an interval, and so we wanted to share the most recent data that we had with you.
How variable is that from year to year?
So the way SADI and safety work, it's an Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers metric. They tell you how to calculate it. So in general, it can have some variation, but it typically doesn't have gross variation. So I wouldn't expect that it would double in the next rolling year, right? So
I was just thinking if it's weather related. I mean,
so
weather
yeah, so
related,
what
that's
happens, the standard actually allows you to remove extreme events. So that's how you kind of get rid of, so like in 2006, when we had that big Hanukkah Eve storm, that particular series, the outages related to that were removed from the metric, because you can't, to your point, you really can't compare year over year if you've got a big amount like that.
Can you look at our area as, I mean, can you look at Lake Forest Park? Can you break it down as small as that?
It wouldn't be called SADI or safety, because that's a system
Okay,
number.
right, thank you, got it.
What would be the reason for an interruption if it's not like a natural weather occurrence?
Oh, lots of reasons. Really common is carpool accidents. The most recent outage that I was a part of, I was at my daughter's house in Delaware, and a squirrel decided to find out about electrical transformers in not a pleasant way. I actually saw the flash, which was really, I'd never seen one before that close to her. She lives on the 3rd floor, so the transformer was really close to her. You can have insulation failure in cables. There are things, you can have other equipment failure. There's just a variety of reasons. So basically, anytime, so the way the grid is designed is that you make sure that your wires, you always have separation such that there won't be arcing or flashing, but anything that causes like a cable or an overhead wire to where that insulation doesn't provide that protection, it can go to ground and cause a fault. And then the way the grid is designed, when there is a fault, for safety reasons, we actually will disconnect that. I'm going to talk about some technology that we have here in this neighborhood that helps us. We actually reconfigure the grid. We take out the damaged section with automated switches, and we bring the whole system back.
So these numbers smaller is better, right?
Yes.
Okay.
So average duration, this is how many, I believe it's in minutes, and frequency is in quantity. So the system average interruption frequency index is 0.75, and it's per year. So it's across that year.
So you're saying that Seattle City Light is way better than all of the nation and Washington and these other.
Yeah, so I'm an engineer, so I'm not going to say better. I'm going to say you can see that the data shows, you know, I sound like Miss Frizzle here, but for anybody who remembers that TV show.
I do too.
They brought it back.
Oh, yeah, it was a great show. Wonderful show.
And maybe you're gonna talk about why it's better? Or
Why it's better to have the lower numbers?
You know, why does Seattle City Light have such a much better, smaller time than?
Yeah, I wasn't planning on talking about that, but I certainly can. We have a compact system. So, you know, if you think about some public utilities, perhaps they have a long distance to go between where their truck is and where the event occurred.
there are, it's,
Some utilities have a much, much larger service area. I
Service
mean,
area,
yeah, ours
yeah.
is very compact.
we're pretty compact. We're 131 square miles. And we have two service centers. We have one in the north part of town and one in the south part of town. So we're able to get to our customers pretty fast. It's I hesitate to say why someone else isn't us, right? It's easier for me to talk to
Yeah,
our
I'm
neighbors.
just
Yeah.
trying to figure out
Yep,
what these
yep,
numbers mean.
Oh,
for
sure.
us. But it sounds like it's good, but is that good for us going forward and for like plugging in more things into the grid or?
Right.
Cause it seems to me like what the question that we were asking is, how stable is this grid for moving forward?
Yeah, so,
Right.
Yeah.
so here, let's talk about our load capacity.
Okay.
So, Jenny?
Just, I mean, it sounds like this is one of the things you're grappling
Yeah.
with, right? Is so as we add the increased load, electric vehicles, electric appliances, heat pumps, right? How does this affect the grid? And so we've got some graphs and some information
Yeah.
to share here to help.
Absolutely. So, Seattle City Light, we reached out to the industry leaders. There's an organization called the Electric Power Research Institute. They have a long history. They're a nonprofit. They do all kinds of interesting research related to the grid. And you can ask them to study particular questions. So we wanted to ask them about what's going to be the impact of electrification and what's going to happen to our grid. And so what you can see right now is 2020, our total load is about 9 terawatts, terawatt hours. So a kilo, a mega, a giga, a tera. I think that's right. So so every one of those is a 1000x increase. So you can see that we're about 9. And what they're expecting is that we're going to go to about 16. What we asked them to do was not to do any mitigation in this study. We said, give us the space so we understand what we're looking for. So they didn't like throw extra energy efficiency or anything in there. We wanted to just get a handle on it because we know that by doing certain things, we can help reduce that number. But if we'd asked for some of that stuff, it would have kind of masked it. So this is what we are, this is our best guess right now. We gave them all the information that they asked for and transportation electrification, building electrification. So if you see across the top, the sectors are total, that's the black line. Transportation is the green. So you can see that the green is going from basically 0 to a pretty significant number, right? I'd say maybe 3-ish. And then industrial, you'll see the industrial is pretty much staying consistent. Commercial, we're expecting more building electrification to happen. So that's where depicted there. And then residential, that's like the heat pumps. So we're expecting growth, and that's how we think that the growth will occur.
Does that chart say almost all of it is going to be from electric vehicles?
The largest, if you look, you'll see that the residential, you'll see that it does increase. That's the heat pump.
Yeah.
And
Electric
electric.
to the top.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's an assumption that of population numbers, right? That's what goes into this.
Yeah, there's population numbers. I mean, it's a forecast, right? So there's a little bit of,
Wondering what the parameters are that they use. It doesn't matter.
yeah, what we did was we asked them for 2042, we asked them to look at what happens to cars, what happens to buildings, what happens to just the whole myriad for our service territory.
I can send you the link to, we've got a blog post that just kind of does a real high level summary and then a link to the actual assessment if you wanted to dive in a little bit.
Sure.
Because it does go into more detail about the parameters and everything. I don't know what level of detail you're interested, but I'm happy to provide that.
I look at that and then I wonder.
There's more, right? There's more.
There's definitely more to the
Yeah.
story. Yeah,
There is a full report. I think it's like 100 pages.
it is. So you may not want that part,
Yeah,
but
no.
we've got an executive summary that would be helpful.
It just goes on to what is it? That big an increase in anything in such for it.
Again, it doesn't look like enough. Like when you look at the King County, like the goals as far as like being carbon neutral, I think, is it like 2040? Like it doesn't look like that's gonna do it.
So there were 3 scenarios that were presented. One was business as usual. One was this one, and one was kind of an aggressive electrification scenario. So I think of the aggressive electrification scenario as kind of the aspirational scenario. So perhaps that's good. It's really hard to know what who's using, right? So that's why we bracketed. And then when we chose which one we talk about the middle scenario, because we feel like business as usual. When we described the actual project, when we reached out to EPRI and said, here's our scope of work, we felt like things had moved between that time. So that felt like it was too conservative. And then the other one felt, as I said, aspirational. So that's why we chose the middle. So we talk about the middle one. But it is, all 3 of them are presented in the full report. Let's keep it going here. So this is a graphic that shows what our system capacity was in 2019. That was the data that we shared with EPRI. We didn't want to give them any of the COVID period data because it felt like that would skew the results. So 2019 felt like a good. So what you'll see is that the orange is our load, and we typically have like this cold snap in the winter that causes kind of that peak that's occurring. And you'll see there's a kind of a middle band. Well, that's because they're actually, this is an hourly curve. And so there's an orange bit and a blue bit that comes together. And so that's just the variation across a day. We have a certain amount of variation. And the blue is our capacity. And so that's our total capacity. We typically operate a little below that because we need some reliability, contingency, but this graphic shows the full. And you'll notice that there's kind of this higher line, then it goes down, then it comes over and it goes up. Well, we have summer ratings and winter ratings. So that makes sense. You know, in the summer, the wires get warmer, they don't have as much capacity. So we, and what happens is as we build infrastructure, we are increasing that level of the top of the blue line. And we're expecting that as customers are adding load, that orange line is going up, right? And as you do solar, perhaps the orange line is coming down a little bit, right? Because you're compensating for your load growth if you've put solar on your house with that capacity. So that's a capacity curve. So how have we used these results? Did we just put it up on the web? Nah, we did more than that. We're using it in our own internal planning. We do something called an integrated resource plan. The state requires every utility of up to a certain size to do one. It's done every 2 years. So we've really used it internally for that purpose. We need to do a load forecast for a 20-year period. So we've used that to impact that. And then we also do engineering studies. We talk about how much capacity we have on our wires. So we have multiple time horizons that we're looking at, 3 to 5 years, 5 to 10 years. And we've integrated that into our various engineering studies. We want to make sure that we have enough power. So if we need to buy or generate extra, that's kind of how it helps us. As I said, we do transmission, we do engineering studies, we do transmission studies. So transmission is 50,000 volts and up. Seattle City Light has 115,000 volt transmission system and a 230,000 volt transmission system. And there's this organization called NERC. They have transmission reliability standards that we need to meet. So we study all of our transmission, and part of that is figuring out how much load you have. And so we make sure that we've used load scenarios that are increasing. On the distribution system, we do kind of local studies for portions of the grid. Like if a large customer is coming in and they say we want 10 megawatts, we'll do something called a system impact study for them. And we make sure that we have enough. We call it system. It's really the wires, the substation, the transformers, all of that. And part of the reason we have these different time horizons is that different kinds of equipment needs different time horizons. So a substation takes longer to build than changing a wire out from a smaller size to a larger size. So we're doing this at multiple time horizons so that we can figure out what bodies of work we need to do. Our job is to provide electricity. That's what we do. And if we don't, we take pride in making sure that we get power to our customers.
Yeah, across all of our electrification programs, I mean, we are always really thinking about and challenging, that equitable distribution, right? So within the city of Seattle and our franchise cities across our entire service area, and thinking about all of our customers. So I just kind of added that in here, but wanted to make sure that is definitely things we're thinking about and talking about. Okay, so then you had some questions about undergrounding the electrical system and the feasibility of that and kind of advantages and disadvantages. So we can run through that, and then I've got some more on community solar.
As you know, the city of Lake Forest Park has a lot of trees. It's beautiful. It's a wall of, sometimes you're walking into a wall, so that wall sometimes collapses, and then people say, I want to keep my gas. That's the issue we're kind of addressing here.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, everyone that we talked to can remember, there was a power outage that lasted a day last year, and there was one 2 years ago that lasted 2 days, and it was always related to a tree. And it's like, well, people aren't going to want to switch to electric heat if they might be without heat for a couple days. I feel like people would be more willing to adopt electrification if they felt like, we're doing something about these power outages that happen once a year or so.
But also, what I've been worrying about lately is that I have heard the risk of large forest fire, like what happened in Maui, hitting Lake Forest Park is something that's like a big risk. And having power lines that are above ground rather than underground are often responsible for fires. And so is it something that is worth doing as we get into this world where forest fires are so prevalent, even in cities like ours? Like, I see something, the number one risk to our town. What did you say about that? It seems like putting power lines underground is normal.
So I can tell you that Seattle City Light has a wildfire plan. I don't know if you're familiar with the sourdough fire that has been burning up by Highway 20. That's by our dams, right? So our Skagit dams are up there. I personally worked on the incident management team for that project, for that event. I have basically a paperwork. My job was to create something called the incident action plan and make sure that things are documented so that people can go back and make, when decisions are made, there need to be documented so that folks can go back and check them out. That's what I did. And sometimes it's during the day, and sometimes it's a week later, and sometimes it's much longer than that. But yeah, so we do have a wildlife. We've just produced it. I don't know if we've published it on the web. We have. Okay. Yep. So there you go.
We'll send that link as well. It's our wildfire risk reduction strategy.
There you go. And we do, I think as an industry, we're all learning. So I don't want to, don't say that you're positive about something unless you are. So I think we're learning about what wildlife mitigation is, but we were very conscious about how we operated the grid while the sourdough fire was happening, or when it was close to our lines. So, but talking about the electrical system, that's the distribution system. So the sourdough fires are close to our transmission lines, 230, it's about 100 miles from there to our nearest substation. City Light has poles and wires, right? And those are mostly in the public right of way. If you think about it, older homes have that's the system that they have. If you want to do below grade, you often have to get easements. So that requires another challenge to building a system. And one of the things we don't like to do is, up and down, because that adds extra unreliability. So we'd like to create sections that are underground, not just small pockets. And what I'm talking about is like, you wouldn't want to do a block underground and then a block overhead and then a block underground. So that's not good. It's also pretty expensive. You have to dig up the ground, you have to put conduits, you have to put vaults. And when we say a vault, it's something like an 8 by 10 hole in the ground with concrete walls, and people have to be able to get in there because the electrical equipment is there. There can be slightly smaller also. So it's pretty expensive to make that happen. And it takes longer because you have to do a whole digging things is much that undergrounding of anything is much slower than just putting it up. So what are the advantages and disadvantages? It's more expensive to build, and that results in higher electricity rates for customers. The outages, when an outage does occur in an underground system, it's typically a longer outage. It's more expensive to locate and to repair that. It's vulnerable to digging. When they were building I remember for some reason, you remember weird things, but when they built the new Seattle library, somebody dug into the electrical grid downtown because they were doing a tieback or something like that. Their construction things happen when people are constructing. It's also susceptible to damage from earthquakes because things can shear. But having said that, there are advantages, right? We all know that. It's protected from high winds and tree branches and animals, that poor squirrel RIP that I was talking about. People aren't likely to come in contact with underground cables. There's no pole for a car pole accident to occur with, right? So it's underground. There are still those green boxes, those are electrical switches, but typically I haven't heard about too many people having car switch accidents.
No.
And then aesthetically, I mean, we will all agree that it is prettier not to have.
Well, the city passes an ordinance that says all new construction is underground, has to be underground. I mean, we're thinking about making that recommendation. I mean, then what would you do? So that becomes the contractor's problem?
No, I think that's a city light Lake Forest Park conversation
Yes.
as a franchise city, I believe the
Yeah.
term is.
Yeah.
So as an engineer, whatever is agreed upon is what we do.
Do we have neighborhoods with underground?
Not aware of any.
Because what? I don't know. So Shoreline has a whole, like, all of Innisarga is underground.
I was wondering what the example was.
Yeah.
Wait, where?
In a
Innisarga.
So how does that happen? Like, do we like recommend like an assessment for how much it would cost? Or like, how can we get the ball rolling on that?
That's a good question.
I would. Wrong person. No comment.
Let me talk to the real estate team and then get back. It's a really good question, and I don't know off the top of my head, so I don't want to.
I would think that it's an entirely political question, so it might not be the case where the technical staff necessarily knows how to approach that question, so.
We're not building any here.
Yeah.
So would the idea be new neighborhoods would be underground or each new building?
Well,
Is it, if it's that
Yeah.
under over, then that might. be better.
well, what if they built a new cul-de-sac?
And
we can
Like
imagine
a
there'd be
block,
new
that's
cul-de-sac.
a block, yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, I totally work.
Just to give you a little bit of background on Lake Forest Park. The main part of Lake Forest, the old part of Lake Forest Park is around this town center area. But since the Growth Management Act, I think there have been 70 different acquisitions, almost a block at a time of our city. And so consequently, we inherited whatever unincorporated King County or whatever municipality was in that area at the time had. And so it's kind of a hodgepodge of everything anyway. So,
So I just wanted to mention kind of an alternate solution that we've been putting in. This is This is an automated system. It's a scheme. And it's called FLIZR, Fault Location Isolation and Service Restoration. And what happens is that you imagine like a ring of these devices. And if you have a fault in one section of it, it will tell the switches on both sides of that to open, and then it'll continue to feed everybody else. So our first installation was a pair of feeders, and it was in this area. We're doing we've designed a second one, and we're installing, we're gonna be designing one starting next year. So we do sections, we've gone and identified feeders that would benefit from this, and so they're kind of distributed. We do some in the north, some in the south.
So you said you installed the first pilot in 2015.
Yeah.
Do you have any data from that pilot on, how it's affected?
We
duration of
do,
outages?
we've answered that, and I don't know it off the top of my head, but we can certainly get that to you.
But it
Yeah.
has actually kicked in when it needs to kick in.
It does. The part of the challenge is that there are lots of things that are going on in the grid during a storm. So I'm remembering one instance where this worked properly, but then a transmission line had a problem. So, okay, great. But yeah, we can certainly, I don't exactly remember the numbers.
Yeah, it'd just be nice
We
to,
can revert
again,
that.
Yeah.
show people, oh, they're doing something and this is what this new
Yeah.
thing is, how the effect that it's having.
Sure.
It's the same
Great question.
is it? Or is it-
It is more expensive to do than a non-automated switch. It is less expensive to do than underground.
A lot less expensive.
What, do we have numbers for undergrounding?
For installing a new system,
Yeah,
it's $1,000 a foot.
Not just sidewalk, is it?
How much is a sidewalk?
Yeah,
It's about $1 million a quarter mile, so,
$1.25 million.
yeah, so it's more expensive than a sidewalk,
That's not right.
yes.
I'm shocked if it wasn't.
Yeah, I know.
Maybe you could join at the same time.
Right, $1,000 is completely.
That's a lot of money.
I think it's $5 million, just doing the math. If you just 5280 with
Yeah.
3 zeros added at the end, so it's 5.28. Got it.
$5.28 million.
Yeah.
Per mile.
For the whole city.
To do the mile, a
Per
mile,
mile.
a mile. I was just multiplying 1,000
Right.
times
Yeah.
5280.
That's that.
No, he's then.
Right,
Or, yeah.
right. Yeah.
It's a complex.
Yeah.
Especially in existing communities, right? That's that's part of the challenge.
You have the right of way for the overhead power lines, but we can't utilize that same right of way to go underground.
Typically need more land, because if you think about what the footprint of a pole is and the switch compared to like putting a vault inside. So a vault can be 8 by 10 feet, 5 by 7 feet. So it's just physically larger.
How many of the vaults, like, I mean, that's not like along the whole path, right? Like how many vaults? Do you
Oh,
need?
yeah, so the cable comes on reels.
Mhm.
So typically you need a vault every end of every reel so that you can, that's where you splice it. So you wouldn't want to put a splice in the middle, so you put them at the end. And then if you have a customer who needs to be served, there's usually a vault there so that you can take it to them, because they'll have an underground service.
Okay, so in front of every house, there needs to be a vault.
I'm always hesitant to say every, because there's exceptions, but we have it, there'll be some electrical infrastructure that needs to be there. It may be a handhole instead of a vault. So typically same kind of idea, it's just slightly smaller, like a 4 by 4 by 4 might be a handhole, or or you can even do smaller handholds than that. So there would be, there needs to be electrical infrastructure all the way through. Any place that you need to peel off, you need to put something. It's just basically, if you think about it, any junction requires some kind of a underground box here.
You know, when Innisarden went underground.
I think when they were built.
That's what I was.
And I think, you know, the Polk tablet, Stephen Kenwood, too, I think it does have. But it was one construction all done at the same time. And so when they sold, when the timber company sold it to the developer. That's, I think.
We've got just 3 slides left.
Okay.
So about community solar.
You asked about
You
community
did.
solar.
So I'd like to-
So we talked to you about community solar. So we've been working on something called a distributed energy resource strategy. Distributed energy resource is one of these terms that the grid people love to come up with, these big kind of complicated terms. It's like, well, what does that mean? Well, most often a DER is solar, and these days distributed distributed batteries. So customers are starting to put batteries in their homes also. So so solar is a DER, and one of the recommendations that we have in our DER strategy is to do more community solar projects. So we are heading in that direction. It's worth knowing that there's a lot of work that needs to happen kind of behind the scenes before you can provide it for someone to buy. So we need to find a location. We need to do an.
We have the location.
Do
We
you
have
really?
your Seattle City Lights Reservoir. The toll. We have a big thing. It's,
The South Fork tote?
I don't know which toll. It's
The
on
one
top
over
of
by,
Horizon View. It's up on Horizon View Park. There's the
you-
water owns it, and you could.
the SPU reservoir?
Yes.
Okay.
So, and then all around the edge,
Okay.
you could put it in.
Yep.
Yep, it's just one,
So-
no, that's the space. We picked it out.
You picked it out for us. Well, thank you. Thank you. So we need to, our strategy, it came out in August. So we had our final meeting, August 20. Yeah,
Week ago.
it
2 weeks
was,
ago.
it was very recently. So we have, I did a presentation today for our executive team, talking about how to move from the strategy to the implementation. So we're at the very beginning parts of that. We have a team of folks who does work on, they will be working on developing community solar. We reached out to that person. And so we just need to get the parts and pieces. And I think that there is excitement around community solar, quite honestly.
And we're very excited because we can't, lots of people can't, well, the solar, because we're hydro, the solar doesn't impact our greenhouse gases. But a lot of people are interested in solar, but it doesn't pay off because there's so many trees.
Trees. Me.
So a
Right,
notion
exactly.
that you could purchase it and participate, I think we're hearing a lot of people.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So how do we move on that if we have a site already picked out? Is there a way we can co-heal and? Like, we want to be.
You want to be number one? You want to be, we want to be
All right,
first.
well,
We can certainly take
yeah, I was gonna say, we take it to the
that
program
information.
manager.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Neither one of us is the program manager for that body of work, so we do have some
I
specialization
think
within Seattle City Light.
Like the criteria of neighborhoods that this might be a trial for.
I think that will be part of the implementation. As we just said, it just hasn't even gotten quite that far yet. So, but I'm happy to follow up and to say we have interest from Lake Forest Park in a potential location.
Yep.
Because I agree, someone has to go first. So
What about, like,
that's
public school
exciting.
buildings?
Yeah.
Like, on top of public school buildings.
Yeah,
and
so
other
public schools,
buildings,
yeah.
libraries.
Schools do have communities, not community solar, they typically have net metering. So we have quite a few schools that have systems that are about 100 kW on their roofs. Yeah.
All the new construction is so.
Yeah, and we have a green up community program, and so there's a number of solar projects that have been funded through that
for schools, nonprofits, affordable housing locations, yeah. Okay, I just want to be respectful of time. We're gonna eat up the rest
Oh,
of your
I
meeting
barely
time.
Oh, I was gonna wait till done.
Okay, just a couple more things. You kind of hit on a couple of these already.
Sure, we are, I think the key thing to know is that we are, working, we have identified community solar, it is
Mhm.
part of our forward-facing plan. Right, so we know that customers would like to have access to these facilities where they can purchase a share. And we just wanted to show you a couple of
Mhm.
projects that we've done in the past. So Woodland Park Zoo has a 61 kilowatt facility. Miller Community Center. It's not actually it's not actually a community solar project, but it's on a community center. So we decided to stretch the definition just a little bit and call it community solar. That's pretty new. We have a microgrid there. It's a 50 kilowatt. The Seattle Aquarium, if you've noticed that, it has a small system there, 44 kilowatts. Some apartments, Jefferson Park on one of the picnic shelters, and then the Finney Neighborhood Association. And I think
With that, that's it.
that's
Yeah.
about it.
So I could stop
The
sharing.
neighborhood association is interesting, so they all kind of banded together and went in on the solar.
I hesitate to answer a question about how that was set up because I don't know.
Okay.
Looks like Anne has her hand up. She's had it up for.
Oh, what a patient person. Thank you, Anne.
Hey, no worries, it hasn't been up that long, but it was prompted by something you mentioned where schools have 100 kilowatt systems. Does Seattle City Light allow net metering for systems greater than 100 kilowatt?
Yeah, so the net metering program is actually specified by the state.
Yes, I'm asking if Seattle City Light is going beyond the program.
Yeah,
that's
we
specified by the
have
state.
something called a large solar rate. And it applies, I don't know, it applies over 100 kilowatts, but I don't know if there's a top number.
Thank you.
But that's what we have. That's what we have available beyond net metering.
And as a small follow-up to that, it appears to me that one of the real hangups in managing the system is during these power outages is having localized storage areas. I don't know if that's correct though. So I wanted to ask what Seattle City Light is doing to create, for example, power reserves in areas where when the power goes down, I live in an area where I'm very fortunate. The power rarely goes down, but when it goes down for 4 days to a week. And it's also at a time when everything in the area is going down. Is it possible or feasible to develop storage reserves, microgrid areas where portions of the grid could be brought back up online using stored energy from some form of a local battery storage system? These are still kind of prototype, but do you understand my question well enough to feel that you can answer it?
I'll give it a stab, and if I'm wrong, you can go and fine tune it some more.
Thank you.
So you'll see in the center top is Miller Community Center. So that is a project that we did. It's part of the Clean Energy Fund 2. We got a grant, 50-50 grant with the state of Washington. We actually paid a little more than 50. So what we did was we put a solar array on the roof. It's on the gym portion of that community center. And we have 2 batteries, 200 kilowatt, 800 kilowatt hour, and we have a microgrid controller. So basically what we're able to do is supply 48 hours of power for that community center. That was the analysis that was done. So we've done a small pilot.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the basis for my asking this is if we have a major disruption, such as a Cascadian earthquake, there's going to be a lot of issues in a lot of places, and power is going to be utterly essential. And having microgrids with small reserved power, stored power in a variety of the little islands that are going to be cut off because we won't be able to get from point A to point B, and everything's going to be down, would go a huge way to improving public safety and the resilience of our communities in the event of a catastrophic emergency, where simply being able to charge a cell phone battery or power an oxygen unit for an elder can be absolutely critical. And I'm wondering if Seattle City Light is looking at that kind of a program, and if so, how Lake Forest Park shoreline area might fit into that.
I don't know. What I can tell you is what we have done. That was kind of the technology side of things, which is where I live. So I think you're asking more of a policy question, and I think that
I saw Jenny write it down.
yeah, I'm not the right person to answer those questions.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Well, actually, if I could follow on to Ed's
Please.
question.
Please do.
There's places like in San Bernardino County that have these huge utility-sized battery storage facilities. Is Seattle City Light planning on doing something like that?
Our challenge is the land cost.
Mhm.
So within our service territory, it's kind of hard to find acres of property.
So here's what I'm positing. What if we use that land near Horizon View Reservoir for a battery storage unit rather than solar? Because I think Ann's hit the nail on the head. We can generate the power almost anywhere on these microgrids all over the place. The hard part is storing it for when we need it, because an earthquake will not conveniently happen during the day. You know, it will most likely happen at night. And so the point being that we will need the power then. And so being able to deliver the power through the existing grid network is more important than the generation.
It's like you could do both, right? You put the batteries down and have the
Yeah,
solar.
But they're huge, that's the thing, it's basically, sometimes you gotta choose one or the other. Like the land on Horizon View may support maybe a megawatt generator, right? I mean, it's about 30 acres, something like that, so. Yeah, so basically, you know, there's that whole space issue too. So it's one of these cases where we have to prioritize what we feel that we need for our community.
Yeah, how many acres are we talking about?
About 30.
About 30, okay.
Okay, are there other questions?
I did have one other question from a community member, about the Seattle City Light relies pretty heavily on hydroelectric power, and if there's an effort to move away from that because of the damage that the dams cause to those funds.
No, we are not planning to move away from hydropower. Yeah, I mean, we are 86%. And I mean, as well as, I mean, we're certainly exploring options for renewables, solar and wind. But I mean, can't access that as at the scale at which we would need in order to, I mean, generate and power everyone in within our service area. You saw the numbers. I mean, it continues to grow. That's the latest and greatest that we've got, which is up probably about 12,000 from the last time I reported out on this. So yeah, I mean, we're not planning to build any new hydroelectric facilities, but certainly maintaining both the schedule and the boundary that we have right now.
Is there any like mitigating measures that you could take?
Well, as part of our relicensing for the schedule, I mean, that's definitely part of what goes into it. And so mitigating any environmental concerns. I mean, they are planning they're making concessions for salmon and making sure that, yeah, I mean, we're operating in a way that we're not doing any harm to the fish. So that will be part of our approval for the license. And that goes into effect in 2025. And I think to be determined if it's 20 years, 30 years, or 50 years. And so that's where the federal, it's for FERC.
Federal Electric Reliability Council?
Commission.
Thank you.
I think.
Yeah, commission sounds better than council.
Yeah, Tracy.
So thank you for your presentation. It was fabulous. I love the fact that you had a lot of data to back up what you were saying. And something that intrigued me was your load capacity is going up at roughly, just using your numbers very crudely, 3 to 3.5% per year. And what I'm wondering is that load capacity entirely coming from the larger interties we have with other power companies, or is it being generated by ourselves, by Seattle City Light?
So my answer to you would be that every day is different.
Mhm.
So we're interconnected to, we generate roughly about half the power that we use.
Right.
And we purchase 40-ish% from BPA, and then we have contracts for the other 10%. So for the power that comes from the Skagit, we have our own transmission lines. For the power that comes from Boundary, we have transmission contracts with BPA, and then for the power that we purchase from BPA, we have transmission contracts.
Right.
And then when we purchase other power, it has to come with transmission. So we're kind of when you're an electric utility, you have this integrated resource plan, which is a long-term kind of rough, 20-year. And then we have people who are doing much closer in purchasing and balancing. They're forecasting and making contracts for months, weeks. And then we actually have a day ahead desk. They're making sure that there's enough power for the next day. And then we participate in something called the energy imbalance market. And that makes sure that it schedules at 5 and 15-minute intervals. So there's just a whole complicated system
So
that
we don't run into the Texas problem, basically.
Yes.
we are working hard. There also in the Northwest, we recently have something called the WRAP, the Western Reliability Adequacy Program. I think that's what WRAP stands for. It's relatively new, but it's kind of this whole idea that together we can build a system that is sturdier than each one of us alone.
So is it fair to say that we're sort of relying on our partners, as it were, the people we purchase power from, to increase their capacity roughly 3 to 3.5% per year in order to accommodate our greater needs that we're going to have to buy, let's say, about half of our power from?
I'm not sure exactly how the transition will happen.
Right.
It would be, I think that as electric utilities, we are all exploring this space together.
All right, so here's my actual question then. That interconnected this question. Do we have the capacity to be able to get this extra power from over the mountains or wherever it's coming from through the passes to us in a timely manner? Because of course, as you point out, during the day, our load shifts quite a bit. So when we start electrifying it, and people plug all their cars in the night or whatever, will we have the capacity to bring that power over the hills to us with the existing infrastructure we have?
So there's something called a load duration curve. And it's kind of like an S. So it's all 87, 60 hours of the year, and you figure out how much do you have this much. And you saw that in this slide, right? How do I get this to go up? I was going to go to this one. Hold on. Oh, great. Okay, thank you. So if you think about what this might look like if you plotted it out by the highest and the next highest and then the next highest, what you find is that the system is designed for those peak days, but there are a lot of hours of the year when you're not at peak. So what we'd like to do is things like managed EV charging. So we'd like to encourage people not to be charging during those peak times. We'd like to have energy storage that we can then help defray those peak loads. And so we're discharging into it. So we're not using somebody's external power at the peak moment. So it's really about trying to figure out how to not increase the peak and fill in kind of the period of time when we're not using all of our capacity.
Right. So the committee, that was my question about the storage versus generation.
Right.
Yeah.
And you mentioned managed EV charging. That's something that is that something that? How does Seattle City Light make that possible
Make-
for people to, plug in
Yeah.
their car and know that it's going to charge, in those times?
So I can talk about King County Transit Bus System. They are electrifying their buses and they are bringing in their charging system is a managed charging system. So they are able to like go from 10 megawatt impact to 6 megawatt impact. Because if you just plug everybody in all at once, they charge all at once, but they have about 5 or 6 hours of duration that they are able to charge. So if they plug everybody in, but then turn it on more in a more measured fashion, they're able to reduce the impact.
So their charging system is able to look at the grid and.
Their charging system evens out their load.
Okay.
So they're basically able to do that in-house.
Okay.
There's a lot of interesting work going on in managed charging. There are cars are able to charge themselves. There are chargers that you're able to do. There are we have something called a demand response program that you can kick in and kind of use it as a pseudo managed charging kind of. So there's what the way that I think about it is that there's this whole body of technology called a flexible load. So we need to figure out how we minimally impact us human beings, because we don't like to be impacted, and yet get benefits for the grid.
Yeah, I was just trying to figure out, is this something where people, can get a charger that does that? Or do they need to, sign something or sign up for something?
There are a variety of solutions. This is,
We are looking at time of use rates as a way to incentivize for residential customers to start. But yeah, so moving that flexible load to overnight, right? And often that's an option for electric vehicle owners. So
I mean, the vision that
there's
I'm
lots of
having here is
options.
a dashboard that you can download onto your phone for the community. So here's Lake Forest Park's demand right now. Here's what the system can provide, and then basically do the time of use charging based off of that. So we can be smart as consumers about when we do it. In addition, the bonus would be the concern about the forest fires. If you were to basically institute something like what PG&E does, which is if it gets above a certain sustained wind temperature, you just shut down. And that would, of course, cause a rolling brownout if, it's in the wrong time of the day, which it often is. And so the point is that basically you could warn people ahead of time with that same app, hey, look, we got to really cut down our load here. So can you help us out? You're kind of doing that with UW right now, right? Asking them when there's basically a large amount of demand during the middle of the day. I experienced it a couple of weeks ago. In fact, I was teaching, and they basically said, sure, we'll cut it back. And so I think that's a great system that you can get everybody to buy into, because everybody sees the need for that change at that time. I think part of the problem right now is this lack of information that everybody shares that would allow them to make smart decisions individually. So
our grid was really designed over the last 100 years, right? And so that's part of what my job is to try to bring these new concepts. There's something called an advanced distribution management system. And we have asked for a grant from the federal government to install one of those. So there are things to do, there are directions for the grid to go. My boss likes to say, we need to change the architecture of the grid. And I'm like, what's the architecture of the grid? And it turns out, if you think about it, it was built a certain way to function a certain way, and now we need to change how it's built, how it functions. And it took a long time to build it. Hopefully we will be faster at adapting. That's our goal. So that's why we asked for the federal grant, because it helps us do that. So cross our fingers. If you know anybody at DOE, please put in a good word for us.
Thank you very much. We're gonna give we'll take a 2-minute break and let you pack up and get
Okay, great, thank you.
I've got a little bit more to do here.
Yeah.
Yeah, oh, yeah, sure. Okay.
I'm gonna go grab some dinner.
Yeah.
Don't take it personally. My stomach is talking to me.
Well, thank you, we really
Yeah, thank
appreciate it.
you.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming out.
Yeah, thank you.
Happy to share our knowledge. And as you said, the more that we know about how this grid operates, the better off we will all be as citizens.
Absolutely, yeah. So I've got some follow-up links to send to you to share with
Okay.
the group. If you think of any other questions, reach out, let me know. I'll send them to Sarah, and Sarah, you send it to me, and then I'm happy to follow up.
And I will send this presentation out to you all.
Perfect. All right, well, thanks.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate the opportunity to come. I can talk about the grid. Jenny knows this.
Well, yeah, yeah, it was.
Yeah, as you continue on, depending on how far you get on your climate action plan, we'd be happy to come back.
We're close.
Yeah. Okay, thank you so much.
We also have a climate adaptation plan.
We do, yeah,
Looked on our website.
Yes.
A really nicely done document.
and maybe that's even, we might be able to have Rhonda come
Yeah.
and chat, because specific.
Rhonda.
Stroud,
I know.
okay. She's our climate resiliency
You know
advisor.
Crystal Raymond?
I don't know.
She used to work at City Light.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so Crystal did the adaptation plan and then she moved to UW and Rhonda came from UW.
Yep.
So like, so it's like,
They swapped.
no, they swapped. So, thank you so much.
Yep, thank you. Have a good night.
Well, one of the things I learned is everything takes more time than you think, right?
Yes.
That's
twice.
Yeah, yes, I thought that would take 20 minutes, so that was wrong.
Now we know how much time to bill our other speakers.
Yes, yes, that was.
Good conversation.
It was a good conversation. And
And the undergrounding thing basically was that, once they build it, they don't look at it again because they figure it's good for a good long time, right? And that's where basically all the vault fires happen. So,
Vault fires?
yeah, vault fires, literally, basically, it gets overheated, the insulation catches and it just starts burning. And nobody knows about it until the electricity literally goes out, right? And by that time, it's destroyed, it's melted, yeah. That happened in my college, for instance. Yeah, and the fire department said, yeah, that's been going on for like 3 days.
Fire?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh,
They,
that's so scary.
Yeah.
they haven't installed like monitoring system.
Yeah.
Because remember, they built the vaults at my college when the college was built in 1970. They hadn't thought of that. So, yeah.
But it must much.
I wouldn't count it. Because like I said, the whole thing is to hold the spool, really, right? So.
the other thing I got is it's complex. So
It
the
takes
pillow,
longer and it's complex.
it takes longer than it's complex.
And it takes some money.
It takes more money, yeah. And it wasn't as easy as suggesting a policy framework. Anyway. I wanted to, I'm gonna change the subject just for a minute and talk a little bit about what our plan and what we've done. And first of all, I wanted to say, everybody really went to work and did their pieces of the grid that Dana filled out, and we filled that out up there. And what I have in front of up here, what I have in front of us is just the strategies, not the details underneath it. And I'm hoping that we could take a quick look at what people said in the strategies. And then we'll get you, as we see those quickly, you'll see that the format is different. And I would like to ignore that for the moment. And then at the end, come back and say, which was the most helpful format for people. And let me just jump way ahead here. We had talked about wanting to, at the picnic, this is all related to Picnic in the Park. We had talked about in Picnic in the Park that our objective really, I think, at this point, at those meetings, is to have conversations with people. It's not to tell them everything we have, but it is to give them a hint about where we're going. I had dreams that we would be sharing the final plan with them at this meeting, but that's Picnic in the Park. That's not. So a piece of this also is there, I have a couple of designs for things that we could share with people that are just, what's the future look like? It looks electric. is there, this is the question I'm gonna ask at the end, is there something about these 6 areas that we've talked about that we should put up in Picnic in the Park? Okay, so so this is a separate, I hope, Google document. So everybody should be able to see it.
Did you send that out?
No, I put it up there, but it doesn't look like it's up there, does it? Doesn't look like a Google document.
That looks like a Word.
Yes, I think it's here. Here it is. Okay. Now, it moved from the Word doc. Now it's a Google document, right? It says Google Docs on the top. Right?
I was gonna wait for the, yeah, catch up. But-
What?
Hi, Sarah. So I had a quick question about the actual physical data picnic in the park.
Mhm.
Most of the time we're at the farmer's market, we're kind of hemmed in that small area. Do we have any more exterior space around our booth during picnic in the park? In other words, enough to basically set up 6 easels, one with each one of these pages writ large.
I mean, you can have like a pop-up tent. And bring us out pop-up tent.
But are we in a row of pop-up tents, or are we basically
Yeah.
got a fair amount of space around us?
I'll try to leave space, but yeah, it's gonna be tents around. Like all in a row.
Okay.
So,
Because that's one thought I had was basically, these are great. And if you just wanted to make them big, so that there are one sheet, what is on one of those big pads that we have on the
Yeah.
easel, and you just have 6 of these easels. There you go, right?
So can we have, if we had a pop-up tent, can we have a little space in front of that pop-up tent to have like a walk through?
Yeah.
So,
yeah, you guys can do whatever. All in space.
You and I think, Dana, so, you know, so we can do whatever we want if we have to. But let me just show you this. I think this is right. I think now, why isn't this being shared?
That big.
Oh. What have I done here? I'm not sharing the right document.
Just unshare your word. Stop sharing. it.
Stop sharing.
Oh.
Hi. Okay.
There.
Okay, so. Oh. Okay, so. Let me come back and let's ask that question once we sort of look at these, because you'll see the format issue comes up differently. So, I don't know what the best way to do this is. I'm gonna read them out loud. For transportation, and some people had a goal, and some people then had strategies, so that was a little different. But the transportation, the target was to increase the number of private EVs from 3% to 33% by 2020, and municipal EVs to 100% by 2035. And the strategies were encourage the transition to EVs, reduce the use of private gas-powered vehicles, improve the last mile access to mass transit, schools, town centers, and something. Else, reduce greenhouse gas associated with business travel, and eliminate gas-powered yard and garden tools by 2030. So one question is, do you know what those mean? Are they transparent enough? That's a question.
Encouraging transition to EVs is sort of squishy. Is that by promoting it in events? Is that what we're talking about? Is that, or what does that mean?
disseminating information about.
Sharing information.
So what's a better word? Anne and I worked on this one.
It's just what do you mean by, how are we going to encourage it? Just kind of, but that's, you don't have to answer that now.
Okay.
1 and 2 seem like they're kind of saying the same thing.
I think encourage, you mean by public,
Public-
by education.
Education,
and-
yeah.
So that, I would just say that there.
Okay, I put a note in here. So- As
Yeah,
a reminder, right? Okay.
Well, again, the more specific you are, you kind of can hem yourself in, because it's like, if you just say encourage, then it's like, you can do whatever, but if you say by educating people, then it's like all of a sudden providing people with some sort of incentive is off the table because it's not covered in what you wrote.
Okay.
So I think leaving it vague has that Like, well, yeah, we can use all means at our disposal to
These
encourage.
are just the strategies rather than the.
Yeah, the tactics under.
Okay, okay.
Okay, all right, environmental, what now? I do something, right? Escape,
Escape.
okay, all right. I'm gonna be good in 20 years, I'm gonna be dead. Built environment and land use, and these were, the strategies were use less energy, use cleaner energy sources, and build strategically. They're a little different. And there's not that goal piece, and that sort of piece. Does that make sense? Would people understand what those were? I guess is the question.
Anne has a question.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I actually like not having a long detailed explanation that follows with by doing this, that, and the other thing. Because there's so many ways that you can achieve using less energy that it makes it more complicated if we start listing all the ways. So for this part of the process, I actually lean towards using these more open, broad statements of goals or strategies without filling in the entire pathway of how we are planning to accomplish that. Or even on something like encourage, encourage by using public meetings or whatever, starts getting very long. Just as a comment.
And I just want to remind you that in the I just pulled this from the document. In the document itself, there are much more specific set of things that describe.
So if this is a poster for people to see, having it streamlined is nice, but then you maybe want to support that with the information that's in the rest of the document. So anybody that's talking to the public should be aware of, okay, well, the ways that we're sort of thinking that these would be done are
Because these are talking points, these are basically
yeah,
conversation starters, and
they
then
want you to use less energy.
we need to,
and then-
they're gonna say, well, how am I gonna do that?
Yeah.
Then we need to have the next items that are in the table in
So-
our heads.
So the people who
Or
are
on the paper.
Or on the paper,
paper.
yeah.
Okay, so, so we want to, for this, we want to at least publish for ourselves at least, the whole document that we have with this, and that's this one. I'm just going to, will this switch? But this is the long one. So as you can see, I just pulled the strategies from these, and underneath them are all the specific stuff that we ask people to do, that you all did. Okay. All right, in consumption and solid waste, prevent unnecessary waste, support local food supply, support healthy water systems, educational programs on waste reduction, composting, and recycling, and reduce waste in city purchasing. People know what those. So in the natural systems and environment ecosystems, there was a goal which was preserve and enhance the health of the abundance of natural systems and water resources to enhance resilience, health, and mitigation of the Lake Forest Park citizens during climate change. And the community priorities that were expand tree canopy, sequestration opportunities, expand ecological restoration, protect critical natural areas. And I wasn't exactly sure what those were, but they weren't tactics, they weren't strategies. You did this, Matt, right?
No, this is Brian.
Oh, Brian and who?
Probably supposed to be me, but I haven't been around.
Okay, okay. So I don't know what that is, but here the strategies are develop climate smart policies and protection for urban trees, and develop climate smart policies and protection for urban watersheds. So this in natural environment is about trees and water.
It's like some of those old thinking strategies.
Yes. I wasn't sure what community priorities were pointing to. I mean, I don't
I
know.
think those will be the results of these climate smart policies, that then tree canopy expanded. that's. It feels like he's putting emphasis on creating policy that will then lead to the outcomes that we want. Which is probably true for almost everything we want to do.
Yeah, that seems like overly general.
But that's why, I guess that's why I started with the goal and the priorities, to give some of the detail that.
That might be better for something like a public. Look at this, to have something more than just saying we're gonna develop policy.
Take something from the goals and community programs and add it as a strategy.
I was
So was this your area, Dana? Are you saying you want to change things
Yeah.
Dana's on it.
by Saturday?
Okay. I'll talk.
I know you're suffering with COVID. Community resilience and preparedness. Strategy 1 is education. Policymakers and citizens of Lake Forest Park understand the climate change related vulnerabilities and opportunities for increasing resilience as described for shoreline.
So he can blame me for all this.
Okay, there we go.
Me, I blame both of us. We
Uh,
had really good conversations about it though.
What if you're not familiar with
Sure,
shoreline response?
right.
well, this was for us, this was an
Okay.
internal, this was supposed to be so that we could then use what Shoreline had to say, because it's very well articulated.
Yeah.
And,
So
so
maybe
essentially,
we could say
you
that,
can take it out and
just
just take it out.
use what Shoreline has to say, because they're a little ahead
Well,
of
the as described is sort of the details, you just erase that, it doesn't have to be there.
But you know it somehow. Well, now what?
Well, it's on the website, we can find it, but I mean, is that like too much? Is it? It's like, it's not as simple as some of the other ones.
Like, Anne has her hand.
And don't
Just.
just
Okay.
don't.
Sorry. Yeah, when I'm looking at this, I can't tell if people do have this understanding or if this is what we're trying to accomplish. You know, it says as currently written, it says everybody has this understanding.
So the way this one was structured was underneath this strategy were specific ways to get to that goal, and so that was explained in the stuff underneath.
Okay, so ensure policymakers and citizens understand.
That's the goal, so it's kind of the same as developing policy, right, how you gonna do that? So,
The action verb in the sentence as it's currently written is understand.
right, how do you get there,
And
right, so it needs
I
to be
think that-
structured different.
I think that she was saying, if you put ensure these people understand, then it
Yes.
becomes like.
Yeah,
That's
you're
a
making it a
defense
statement
clause.
that everybody already understands it.
Mhm.
Okay, so
Excellent.
what do I do?
You're
Right,
it's
right.
a given right now. Thank you.
Excellent,
There, that's it. Ensure that policymakers. and
Lowercase
citizens
p.
report- What?
Lowercase p.
yeah,
Thank you. Policymakers and citizens of Lake Forest Park understand the climate change related vulnerabilities and opportunities for increasing resiliency.
awesome.
2 is planning. City codifies CO2 emissions and resilience building into capital improvements in the development of land use policies.
I don't want to codify emissions into it. I want to codify reducing
Right,
emission reduction planning.
yeah,
Okay, codifies.
Emission reduction planning.
just after emissions, you can say reduction plan.
They put that in the wrong place, right? Where do you want it?
It goes up a CO2 emissions reduction plan.
Oh.
Thank you.
Mhm. Okay, so we'll take this out here, okay. Okay. Then the third is strengthen community and municipal emergency preparedness in consideration of predicted climate impacts. Such as extreme heat, flooding, wildfire, smoke and drought. Wildfire, smoke and drought, and also wildfire, I guess we talked about.
Yeah.
Is that, what's the action verb here?
Strengthen.
Okay.
I'm prepared.
Maybe you could just take out the consideration of predictability and just in preparation of climate impact,
You see, Jeff?
potential climate impact.
So strengthen community and municipal emergency preparedness, and then you think, saying take that out?
It just say something. For predicted.
Just for. For,
For predicted climate impacts such as, okay. All right. All right, so municipal was, the goal was apply a climate lens to the city's decision-making and become a leader in climate sustainability. Strategy 1, city council review existing policies, initiate new policies, and pass regulations that demonstrate its commitment to climate sustainability in the community.
Should be reviews, initiates. Vital, is that what she said?
Rather you guys review. That's- We have plenty enough to do as it is, so that's a lot of things to go.
What does that mean that they're gonna review things?
Well, it's really probably part of the comprehensive plan. And when they do the comprehensive plan, right, the council will review existing policies. Initiate new policies, pass regulations when they're doing the comprehensive plan. Is that, Corey and I worked on this one. Is that what we were thinking, Corey?
Isn't that part of like the planning commission?
I was saying that you guys are gonna be having to write these policies for council to approve. We know how to write policy? I don't know how to write policy.
No, I mean, you just need to give direction more than anything else, like, we should have a law about.
Okay.
Right, you don't have to worry about the nuts and bolts
Okay.
part, yeah.
We should have law. That's
Yeah.
gonna be the
I
next
agree.
meeting.
Good.
Yeah.
Good.
So this is, okay. I'm gonna move on.
Who is that for? Is that for us?
Well,
I think so. I think it's for you guys.
yeah,
So it's not city council that needs to be there.
It's the climate action committee.
no, I don't wanna write
It's
that.
Sarah. Sarah will read.
This is. We're getting into like some of them just have a verb and they don't specify who's gonna do it, because it just assumes that the people who the city puts in charge of implementing the plan will do whatever that verb is. We don't need to
So just
like,
take out city council and just have review existing policies, initiate.
All right,
a lot of this is
I like that.
wording stuff.
Yeah,
And I
yeah.
think what we want to come out of this with is, so like for municipal, like you want, say you were at the table on Saturday. And somebody's like, well,
what's the
What's-
city gonna do?
what's the city doing? Like, you wanna be able to list out, they're gonna do this, this, this. In my 5-paragraph essay, these are the topic sentences. Like, you just want people
Yeah.
to have like a clear and concise idea of like, okay, these are the general domains that they're moving into.
Right. Okay. Provide, I'm gonna read, okay,
That demonstrates commitment. But
Yeah,
we want them to do all of the policies, not the ones that demonstrate as, it just feels like it's.
okay,
Can we just take out that whole
Or just
Yeah.
address that address.
regulations to promote climate sustainability?
okay. It's my school of cooking too, when in doubt, throw it out, so if there are fewer words, I'm good for it.
Yeah, I mean, I
like figure out who's doing what.
So maybe just take out, after that, add promote. And take out demonstrate its commitment
Promote
to,
climate sustainability.
well, no, I just say demonstrate its commitment to, and so it says pass regulations that promote climate sustainability in the
Yeah.
community.
Take out.
Is that all right? Initiate new policies and pass regulations that promote commitment.
Yeah, take out commitment to,
To climate sustainability in the community,
take out commitment to
take out, that promote,
climate
got
sustainability.
it. Thank you.
That's very too.
And maybe two from out rather than that.
I'm sorry, Dana, I didn't hear you.
Change that to two. Between regulations.
Regulations. To promote climate sustainability. Okay. Well, sure. What happened here? Strategy 2, provide a climate lens for municipal operations. Use the power and influence of government to model the elimination of greenhouse gases in city operations.
Can we just change that to eliminate greenhouse gas in city government operations?
Yeah. See, that is so concise. Thank you. That is.
All right.
I like taking out the noun.
So I'm sorry, eliminate. What?
And then get rid of almost everything else down to the GHG.
There's somehow they're in 2 lines.
Yeah, I think it's 2 different cells.
Okay, eliminate. All the way to,
Yeah, to GHG.
okay, eliminate greenhouse, much better, right?
Okay.
Okay. Sorry, I shouldn't have done it here now. Okay, provide a climate, escape.
Oh, no,
Oh,
it's
that's all.
gone, your words are gone.
Okay.
Oh,
All right, back here, eliminate, I'm gonna do this again, I'm so sorry, eliminate. I'm gonna fix it later, I do cutting now, and fixing later, right? Okay. So, the third one, provide a climate lens for transportation. Encourage the transit-oriented development strategies linking housing to transportation and to reduce the use of vehicles by providing bike and walk access. Okay, we're gonna take this out.
Is this, as a point of order, it's 8:40.
Okay,
We probably should rewrite every sentence, right, by
Right.
committee.
But you get the
Okay.
idea.
okay,
Yeah.
we'll take it from here. Let me just say one more thing, and that is what we were thinking about putting up at the display boards were these. But, this, no, there's it, just sharing. Is this a poster like this? What does the climate friendly travel look like? It looks electric, and then these pictures. A poster that says, what do you want to know about? Just to sort of collect some data from people. This would be docs where people would put it on. These are the categories we've been using in the Go Electric category. So it would be, the ones we've done in Shoreline and Kenmore. So we should have a tiny bit of information here. And then this one is the third one. What does a climate friendly home look like? It looks electric. And then the last one, the question we want to do is, do we want to put those strategies that we had in those colored things on? And I also have,
Do you see the one I sent you?
I did, and so there's one more. But while I'm finding it, the question, do we want to create 6 big ones, or do we want to create 3 with those strategies on them and just say this is a draft of where we're moving and
Or maybe
get
just
some-
one with this, right? Because there's only like 3 or 4 for each.
Yeah. We could
If
probably
they
do it.
fit on one.
Yeah.
I think it's the size of the font, if you make it big enough so that people can see it far, or make it.
Okay.
That's what.
It's gonna be too overwhelming having.
Yeah, I don't think we want to have that many words on anything.
Okay, well, how about if we just take what if we just took the 6 categories that we have and say, the Climate Action Committee is working in these 6 areas to have.
What would you
And I
like to know?
can have just a little bit for each.
Well, I love like this,
Yeah.
like you know, maybe you could have a thing that's like a hexagon and it's like transportation has like a picture of an e-bike and a, you know, that first page that you had, and then like the built environment has like this part, and you know, that where it's using pictures more than words.
It's a lot these days, it's
Yeah.
I tried that. I just want you to know.
No, I think-
tried
I
to,
think that this, what you have is great.
Yeah.
I think that what people are suggesting of like, let's take the whole spreadsheet and make posters out of it. Like, I don't know if you want to do that.
okay.
Yes, I mean, why are we doing this?
Well, because we had a dream at one point that we were gonna report to the city, that we would be done and we were gonna present our final product.
Right.
So now we're saying we're gonna present something else, because we're not done.
Or so is this basically a soft rollout of our plan?
It's a conversation, I think it's still just a conversation with people about it.
Okay, in which case I like Matt's idea better. If we're not.
Yeah, if
actually-
it is a rollout of the plan, we should absolutely.
Have the
Right.
plan.
But if it's not, then yeah, let's just do those, yeah.
And so we're trying to get information back from that, or like both ways.
For me, it's also just showing them like we've done something, like here's kind of the starting.
I think you're there to provide education on Saturday.
Yeah, right.
You guys have enough resources and materials to just be there, educate the public. That's your number one goal, really, so.
Yeah, like once we pass the plan, we're gonna have to educate the community. So like, let's just have this be the first event of our new life, which is getting the word out.
Getting the word out, yeah, and getting the final.
Right, so it's kind of prepping to get people on board.
And you guys
right?
can
So-
say,
so-
hey,
So we can bring them along.
Sign up for our notify me's when we do have public comment on our plan, please come to
Right.
our open house.
This is like what we've been doing.
That's what we've
essentially.
been doing.
Yeah, like all of this is what we've
Come
been.
give us input when we're ready, but here's
We're gonna
education.
do motivational interviewing on people. We're gonna say, okay, so, you know, on a scale of 1 to 10, how likely are you to buy a plug-in hybrid car? Okay, what would it take to get that 4 up to a 5? We're gonna have that conversation with every single person, and they're gonna walk away thinking about, well, I guess I
I want to
could.
be 5. I don't want
I
to be
guess
4.
I could.
Yeah. If we could have this in the skeleton of what we have though in a printed form.
Yeah.
So that we can talk about it to anybody who is interested in talking about it, that would be good.
Yes, yeah,
Okay.
that'll get Wi-Fi up there.
Yeah, there's no Wi-Fi
Yeah.
here. So this is another one that, I'm sorry, that Tamara had wanted to move into a poster, and it has to do with dispelling mud.
Can you make it like on the screen?
Myths.
No. That would be too hard. There's 6 of them though, right?
5.
But. And if I knew you were as good at doing these, why am I doing it? Is what I got out of it.
Yeah, that looks
You made
awesome.
that,
Yeah.
that's nice, yeah.
I used Canva. It took me a long time with all the formatting and
I know.
stuff.
I can't get Canvas stuff,
Spent a lot of time on it.
Thank you.
so we'll add this to we'll make this a poster type. So, all right.
So what does it take then? We have to print these out. And then put them on a poster board, or what?
Well, I was gonna go to FedEx and have
Like
them made.
this size?
Yeah,
Like.
yeah, and then we put them on foam core.
Yeah.
And then we can use them again.
Yeah,
another
Yeah.
time.
yeah. Okay,
Okay,
So, but this has to be done by.
it's not a problem. I mean, making a new one is a problem, but publishing the ones we have is not a problem.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying, it's not making
Yeah.
any more. The ones that you showed us are wonderful.
Okay,
Let's do
and then
that.
we'll take we'll have the strategies with us, the whole document, so we can talk about it with people. And again, we're reducing our objective to, I don't mean reducing it, our objective at this point is to engage people in conversations about climate action. Okay. Great. I don't want to keep.
Do we have a target? Do we have any kind of rule for when to have more for people so we can tell them that? Or
Well,
do we not?
next immediate goal is you guys are budgeting presenting to council at some point this year. There are only 6 meetings left in council. So decide when you want to do this.
What are we
Talk to Tom
presenting?
about this.
The whole thing.
But I want you guys to be ready too. I don't,
Right.
like, there's no rush into taking this to council if you're not ready. So, I don't think we're ready. No, not yet, but we need, if we don't know, we don't have a goal.
What do we need to be ready? What is missing?
Well, it's a mess. I mean, I think we have all the data. Maybe,
So this table is not the plan, right? These tables are kind of part of it is very, very important part. But we're not just gonna hand it to them, right? The table, it has all the other stuff that we created in the past.
Okay, yeah, but like, so we have the
Put it
stuff of the past, we
together.
have the tables, but like, what is it that is telling us like, oh, we can't do this right now because X is
It just
missing?
needs to be coherent,
Which
We need a narrative.
right? What's there needs to be, Dana started it. I'm trying to find a few days to work on it.
So the
Let's
question,
see where I can get.
And I don't think I got all the way through, so I'm thinking on the part ahead of where you.
I haven't started it, so you just continue where you were and then I'll do that and look back.
So- this is what I think is what we're saying, is that Mimi has said she would take some of the strategies pieces and sort of look through those and organize them. Is that right? Is that the piece that you said you would?
I wasn't specific, I was just gonna take it from where Jana had left off, and
Okay.
see where I could get.
So that we can pull together something that has a beginning and an end to it, and that is sort of a complete report. We have a couple, it's really, the hard part about it is it's very, language intensive. It doesn't have pictures and it doesn't have graphs, which I think we really need to add to it before, I mean, that makes it readable. I think we need once we're done, we need an executive summary that is, in a one-page brochure that says.
Yeah.
Things that.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
And I followed up with the consultant, she said she had some family issues and she had family in Hawaii as well. So she said she's working on a proposal to send over to me. And so that would include her looking at our plan through like a climate justice lens, and then also have her former student do graphic design for us.
Okay, and she's gonna send a proposal,
Mhm.
so that's another piece of work.
We just need to be able to tell her what the graphics need to be, right? She's not gonna look at it and say, oh, I'm gonna make this for you. It has to come. from us.
Yeah, we should say we want a graphic here.
Mhm. Yeah, so just the content needs to be kind of streamlined and.
It just takes a time to do that too. It seems like, oh, just do it. But it takes a lot to
It's a
go
lot.
through each section.
So that's sort of where I think we are, is that? So the answer, the other thing is, I have to say, I continue to be confused about what the process is. Do we do the public outreach? Do we do a public hearing? Do we do the content of a public
This
hearing?
is the relationship with the.
Yeah.
public-
Council.
with the council, like an open house.
right, I mean, as far as my understanding, Corey, is, correct me if I'm wrong, is that we don't need to have a public hearing. Because this isn't really an ordinance, this is not really changing anything about the city's code.
Got it.
So the point is, whatever outreach you wanna do is fine, that's really my lesson here. I think it would be good to, just because that way more people know how we've been doing. The reason that I also mentioned the 6 business meetings till the end of the year is that literally, the council right now knows what the hell you're doing. We will have 2 new members starting in January, so there's gonna be a process of re-explaining what we're doing, so just keep that in mind.
And what about so I feel like it's really important to be working with the commission, the.
Planning commission.
Planning commission.
Yeah, but they're gonna have their
They're
hands
the
full.
ones that are actually.
But they're gonna have their hands full with the but I wouldn't worry about them too much right now. They're gonna be very busy with
It's like
that.
we're reinventing the wheel, that we're doing all this climate stuff, but they're doing some.
And I do think that you guys should present this to the planning commission. So they can take it and implement it into the comp plan, or maybe they'll have. to work with that.
Maybe they should,
Before city council then?
yeah.
I'll have to ask, I don't know if this should go to council and then go out to public or public and then council. So that's kind of a question that Sarah has,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just the timing.
the order of things.
Mhm.
Right, I mean, it kind of comes down to your confidence in this too. If you feel that you have a very good document, then there's no reason not to just have council look at it and approve it. But on the other hand, if you really do want feedback from the council, then present as if basically it's going to be changed. It's a much better way. So kind of depends.
So is that, would you change it? Like, is that kind of the goal that we present it to council and then council then comes back to us and says like, I want you to like focus more on this area, and this area, and then we work on it again?
Right.
Okay.
I mean, that's basically assuming that the council has a whole lot of comments about it. I haven't had a good read on it, so I don't necessarily know that they'll say anything. They might say, that's brilliant, love it, why are we approving it right now? That kind of thing.
This is like a rough draft.
Yeah, based on when we went before, when Sarah presented the survey results, we talked a little bit about it. People had some good things to say, but it wasn't overwhelming.
Let's say maybe you go to public first, and the council can come, obviously, to that public. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so too, get more public input, I feel like before.
Okay, what do you want the public to say? What kind of feedback do you want to get? Is it about adding more points, or is it about prioritizing? Be very clear what you go, because I don't even know the answer to that question.
Maybe you guys don't need, maybe it is the planning commission.
So is the planning commission, are they obligated to use our plans to go forward, or what, are they just
They are obligated to add a climate element to the plan,
Right.
which they don't have.
to their plan?
Yeah.
And how does that differ from the plan that we're,
Well, I'm hoping they'll just say, okay,
oh, so this is something that we want the planning commission to.
they could adopt it by reference.
But it would be good to have a conversation with them so that we're actually aligning with the way they're thinking.
We present something really good for them.
Right, that's what we.
They meet next Tuesday. I'm going to be the council liaison there because Lori's gone. And they're going to be having an introduction to the consultant who's going to help them with the comp plan revision. It's their first meeting with that. So depending on where you want to insert yourself into the conversation, if you want to be in the ground floor, next week would be great.
So have they already got
Next Tuesday.
Rich and their.
No, this is literally, they have the old comp plan.
Oh.
And basically they're meeting the consultant for the first time on September 12th. And the consultant's probably gonna lay out their outreach strategy about how we're gonna get feedback about how to change the comp plan from the public, that kind of thing. And so at that point, talking about the new requirement that the comp plan said, actually, that didn't pass, right? Or it did pass. The state legislation that we have to include, yes, it did pass. The climate part of the comp plan, that might be an appropriate time to reintroduce ourselves as a group.
I would.
Okay, so Sarah needs to talk to, what's your name, Matt.
So why are they not coming to us and saying, we need to stick climate in here?
Well, they said that Maddie and Lee, who's on the planning commission, said they were reviewing all of they were watching this.
They haven't started their process.
Yes. And they have two,
But they should still be
they have two new members. It would be two, at least one.
too many members.
No, new ones.
Oh.
Yeah.
All right, so what would you like to do at the next meeting? You're not gonna, they're talking about finishing this document in October. So you two have said you would look at the document.
I'm gonna
but
try to
not the-
take 2 days out of work, I'm gonna sit down and bury myself.
That will
Well,
help.
call me an off
That
digit.
is my goal.
In October.
That's when I can do it, I can't do it.
So so our next meeting will be before this, we have the document in our hands. is what I'm saying.
Okay, our next meeting is the third.
Third, yeah.
Okay,
So maybe we can move our meeting. That's the other thing, we can move our meeting.
Move our meeting so that we have a.
So we can see what you guys have,
So we can get further.
Yeah.
so meaning if it's before the 12th, I certainly have happy to help you. I have all over, so.
Oh, that is the goal before
The 12th of October.
so could we move our
Are you
meeting?
gonna help? Are you gonna be there, Dana? She's such a good writer.
I'm happy to hope. I think things will start getting more complicated after the beginning of October.
Yeah.
but also. But yes,
Well,
well, I will look at where I ended up.
Yeah.
And then hopefully. Yeah, maybe we
I'm
can
better
get
at
together then.
and organizational, and then the final wordsmithing is obviously not my best.
So could you tell us when you think that could be, and we will try and schedule our meeting afterwards? Is that-
Sure.
Okay,
Because who is doing it? It's you and me and Tracy and Sarah.
oh, yeah.
She's meeting at
I'm thinking
And
you-
Max.
So
And
maybe
we're
we need
probably
a
gonna
little,
invite them.
One, two, three, four, we can have 4 of us meet. And Tracy, he doesn't count.
Yes.
Okay. All right, so
Yeah.
Meeting
we
sounds
need
like
them,
meeting 4 or less, so we get more members.
but not counting. So maybe we should just do a subcommittee meeting to try to strategy.
When's a good time for that? I'll send out a note.
And then also too, we have our farmer's market, just like people on October 1st, that's before our next meeting. So we can talk about that in subcommittee. About what we want to do. We want to put together our subcommittee meeting before then, so we can.
Is there any reason to do much different from what we're doing for the meeting in the park, or can we just like extract and do a subset of that or something, see what works?
Yeah.
Or at the.
Yeah,
park,
totally.
and then use that to decide what to take.
Yeah, I mean, we have other posters that we did before, kind of like a highlight. All of our best.
And we have,
Best.
and we're gonna have photos, right? And we're gonna have the children's.
Oh,
stuff.
Yeah, we'll do that. We could make C-bombs. We want. and then
Everything
possibly-
Or crayons, we're doing
We're
crayons.
gonna have to display, yeah, so they'll have the drawing submissions so the kids could take them with them or they can do it there. So we wanna have like a little table.
It's like coloring it.
Mm-hmm,
So-
yeah.
And
Yeah, the
seagull,
ones that we got
or
from the farmer's market.
Pardon?
no seagull.
I don't have one.
No C-bombs,
Coloring,
C-bombs would
right.
be, yep, for the farmer's market.
Who's got the pictures that were
I-
drawn at the farmer's market? Oh,
There's a library thing going on?
yeah, we could, if we could
Mhm.
actually,
Yeah, that'll be.
that's the
fun.
word,
Oh, good.
Yeah.
use the word
It's
salt
right up
here,
front.
no, not
Like
the
that.
opposite, that. Behind the pump, there we go, by putting some of those up, right, as kind of
Wonder does
a
that.
serving suggestion here.
Well, I also reached out to Shore Lake Arts to see if we could put like our drawing submission into like a fall newsletter or something, if there's some way they could help us promote it.
That would be a great idea. 6x6 is coming up. It's where anybody can submit a 6-inch by 6-inch visual art piece. And there's like a $6 fee not only associated with it, right? To submit, but it goes up for sale at Shoreline College in November. And
So it could
basically,
be a little coloring in thing.
exactly.
I also have, I was at some event the other day and they were talking about putting out pollinator watering systems, like how to build a little puddle essentially for butterflies or whatever needs water. And it's past the summer now, but those kinds of things. A good
Cool.
coloring
Mhm.
sheet or something.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. Mhm. Yeah, maybe we could do that for farmer's market too.
I'm-
Meetings are. Yeah,